Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. For anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. The beginning of this year, 2023, actually marks my 11 years of being out, and I am so super grateful for the ways my life has unfolded since. I now work with survivors of coercive control, and I'm going to take a moment here to define this term, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe I view coercive control as a social issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and I'm just beginning a new element of my career as an expert witness for legal cases that involve coercive control. As a certified trauma professional, I work with survivors. I'm especially excited to be offering a group survivor program for cult and religious abuse recovery. So this is not a support group, but rather a healing program. It's based on my certification in the incredible work of Dr. Jilly Jenkinson, who gathered decades of research on survivors to create a body of work that I would consider to be the most comprehensive and flexible approach I've come across in this field. We will meet every other week for 6 months, and registration will open in February of 2023 for those interested. Lastly, I am also a research associate at Salford University and explore topics related to coercive control. So let's jump back into a basic understanding of coercive control before I introduce the next episode. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Then gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It may be helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in many cases, in intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know by subscribing and comment with kindness. And always think critically, trust your intuition, and be free. Anke Richter is a columnist and reporter. Her investigative and personal features have been published in Die Zeit, Spiegel, Faz, Taz. That's it for the publications that might be difficult for me to pronounce. New Zealand Geographic, North and South, the Spinoff, Canvas, and others. These are publications you would likely find internationally across the world. She has written 3 previous books and currently lives in New Zealand. I also want to read the description of her most recent book called Cult Trip for you all, so that you might get a flavor for Anke and the breadth of her work in the cultiverse over the past decade, and a little insight into the book itself. So the header states, a leading journalist's personal, intense, and riveting investigation into the worlds of cults. At a New Age festival in Byron Bay, Australia, German journalist Anke Richter is finding her spiritual awakening when she meets a woman, a survivor of the Centrepoint cult, who will change the course of her life and career. Over the next 10 years, Anke pursued a labyrinthine investigation into how and why cults attract, entrap, and destroy otherwise ordinary people, asking what the line is between tribe and cult, participant and perpetrator, seduction and sexual abuse. From the emotional and criminal carnage of Centrepoint in Auckland, New Zealand, to an anti-cult conference in Manchester, the infamous Osho's ashram in India, the Tantric Agama Yoga school in remote Thailand, and culminating in a visit to Gloriavale on the west coast of New Zealand's South Island, Anke uncovers a disturbing pattern of violence and suffering. International bestseller Cult Trip is a powerful exploration of what really goes on inside the groups we call cults and how to reckon with the aftermath. You will hear me speak to the book throughout our interview, but to say a few words here, it's really a wonderful deep dive into the world of a few cults, very fascinating in and of themselves, but Anke weaves threads of connectedness between and through them. This also dovetails with her own life, and so we get to journey through these stories with both survivor voices at the center, as well as Anke's experience and engagement with these groups and individuals. It is a wild ride and so beautifully written, with educational insights along the way. I'm so grateful for Anke's body of work, raising awareness for cult survivors, and also her advocacy to protect the public and educate about these abusive groups. Please be sure to check out the show notes for all of the references mentioned during our interview. We also have a special discount link to Cult Trip for this audience, so please be sure to purchase the book at a massively discounted price. And now, please join us for part 2 of our 3-part interview with Anke Richter.
On my own journey, so to speak, into some groups that fascinated me, and because a lot of them were, had to do with neo-Tantra, or a lot of things were taught there, Osho suddenly came up again and again. And just to give you the background, I'm originally from Cologne in Germany, and Cologne was the European headquarter of the movement, of the sannyasa movement, of the Rajneesh movement. So in my my teens and 20s, there were so many people there, a little bit older or same, a little bit older, very cool, very sort of hip in a spiritual way, always wearing, maroon and orange, and they ran these discos, and I went there and they had great music. It was a good place to go to, and for very sort of clean dancing, with good vibes, good poppy music, and maybe, flirty vibes, whatever, all of that you want as a as a 19-year-old after school. So I was always aware of the movement, and also they were very dominant in Germany, or let's say Germans were very dominant at the ashram in Pune. I think a third of his followers were Germans. So that's a whole story in itself, why that was and how that played out. But when I went there, I didn't go there to investigate them. I was curious. And also we had this, my husband and I did our second honeymoon after 20 years of marriage in India. And we said, let's check this out. Let's just go and meditate. They can't be that bad. And what can possibly go wrong? And nothing went wrong, but it was very culty and very interesting and fascinating. What I didn't know at the time, which has really only just come out in the last 2 years or so, is also that Osho was an alleged sexual abuser himself. We've learned this while I was there. Actually, this book fell into my hands. Who Killed Osho? And I was actually corresponding, talking online to the author who lives in Pune. I think he wasn't there. Yeah. It was all very, very bizarre. I couldn't get out of there fast enough, actually, to be honest. So wouldn't recommend. But I mean, some people love it, some people hate it. I'm clear where I stand. And also, I mean, it was hard for me to completely take my sort of culty glasses off and not take a critical look at some of it. And it always amazes me. People go and don't question the history or don't want to find out who's behind it all. Oh, if they're having a great experience, it's all good. And yeah, I get that at the same time. And maybe that is my German heritage or my journalistic mind or whatever. I always want to also know a little bit more, especially, where does the money go to and so on. So to answer, your Wild Wild Country question also. So of course, when Wild Wild Country came out, I thought, wow, great! Finally, the world is actually learning more about this movement. Which for me, I was always familiar with this. It was, and suddenly people in New Zealand and around the world heard about this for the first time. Like, whoa, what was this? Who is this guy? And it also felt very incomplete, even though it's 5, 6, 7 episodes long, right? Like you said, the voices of the children were completely missing. The voices of survivors, the psychology of what actually went down in the ashram, not just the whole crime saga in Oregon, which of course was fascinating. I mean, you can't make this shit up, yeah? Really? Biopoison takes in all of it, yeah? It's all happened. And it's all, come from that cult. But there was a lot more to this whole movement, which I think is just as fascinating. And I know there are some other documentaries out there, so I hope that people find them. And Lily Dunn's book is great. And again, another piece of the puzzle from the child's perspective. And also My Life in Orange by Tim Guest. I can highly recommend that. He grew up as a child in a commune, in a Rajneesh commune in the UK. And he later died of a drug overdose. And unfortunately, very common around children, especially from that movement. And I also know it from Centrepoint, a lot of overlap there. High levels of addiction, suicidal ideation or actually attempts, prostitution, maybe a level of being lost, being lost, and also having grown up in an environment where sex was on tap, where people were transgressive, which maybe at the time you didn't realize that it was actually transgressive. You were just in a group and you were the youngest one at 14 and you were just doing what all the others and they were doing, and they were cherishing you as the free, teenager of the movement, and you were doing everything right. And it can take years and decades to unpack that. No, actually, that was not consensual. I was 14, I was 12, and they did that, and I did that. And at the time I thought I was treated like an adult, but actually, no, I wasn't. It's such a mindfuck to use that word. Sorry, but
yeah.
Well, so Wild Wild Country, I mentioned it in a book as well. I have mixed feelings about it. I'm glad it's out there as a resource. People get an idea of what it was, and it's not so great that they've given so much talking time to the top dogs, to people who are still really invested and involved, who have not done their accountability as far as I know. One of them has. She's been in jail, and I've actually corresponded with her for a while, the Australian woman.
Oh.
But there was a huge chunk missing from the inside of what it was actually like, and also how people were not doing so great afterwards. So it's right.
Yeah. Well, and I've actually wondered if, to me, the timing of Wild Wild Country kind of began this blossom of major cult expose stuff that's now, pretty rampant in terms of our content. And so I've wondered also if perhaps it's kind of like they did a good job just to get eyeballs on it and interest in the story, because it's incredible. I mean, and it's very well done. But again, now I think with the information we have and some of the other docuseries that have come out, your feedback was exactly what I would say. We need more survivor voices, right? I mean, as you said, they really give the voices to kind of the top dogs who are still, have bought in to some extent or another. And then just some of the missing components around the kids' voices and then, or the story. And then also just the lack of understanding around the cult dynamics, coercive control, what's actually happening that we're looking at here. So,
but you're right. It did kick off a whole new era of cult documentaries, and some really, really good ones that maybe we wouldn't have seen 10, 20 years ago. So in that sense, I'm grateful that people were suddenly hooked on cult docos. And, even if it's more like, oh, get the popcorn, here's another one. But the word's getting out, information's getting out. People are learning something from it. But that also means that these documentaries have to be survivor-focused and trauma-informed and ethically, researched, and not just focusing on the evil guru and his weird followers, but actually unpacking it on a more nuanced level. I think that's really, really important. So hopefully good entertainment, good filmmaking, can open the doors to get the message out and to get this information out. And it's kind of where I want to find myself too, to use the means of entertainment and especially journalism, and just get people, open people's minds to, this could have been you. This could be your neighbors. These are not weirdos. These are people who either need help because they've been damaged, or they need to be held accountable because they've caused damage. And often it's both.
Yeah. So your story then takes us, and this was absolutely fascinating. You gave us a little bit of context that I also so appreciated, again, Anke, just in terms of your writing and your sharing, that you really allow us into your life a little bit, that you're sharing with us that this was sort of a topic of interest for you. And so I cannot imagine what the actual experience may have been.
Can I just throw in here? Those were the hardest bits to write. I know they don't take over the book. There maybe just a few sentences here and there, but gosh, did I sweat over them. And my editor was always saying, no, we need this. Maybe give it a bit more. Maybe be a bit more honest. Be a bit more. Make yourself vulnerable. But those bits about my own experiences, my own endeavors in the neo-Tantra field. Yeah, still a long line to walk for me to talk about that.
I think also part of where I really appreciate you having shared that is, yes, that we get to know you a bit in it, but also that it helps as a reader. I feel like you're with us in a different way as well. Like there's an openness and a respect for the possibilities of what different help type groups can provide. That's also what I really appreciated, was that I could feel kind of your openness and your movement, that you really weren't just a true observer, that your heart is there, your considerations are there, your care for the people are there. It feels more than just a report, I suppose.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I do feel a bit vulnerable around all this.
Yeah.
Not so much sharing how I didn't do so well with my Centrepoint research and how that affected me. That's one thing, being open about struggling as a journalist, but to let readers look into my more intimate life and these personal endeavors. That actually means a lot hearing this from you as a reader, because I was worried that I would be judged for that and that I would lose credibility, and you'd go, oh, she did that, she did what, she went to this group, and then she, oh my God, especially now that more has come out. Very coincidentally, but just as I was wrapping up my book in the very final stages, a huge call out started online around this movement or group ISTA. So, I did feel really vulnerable. I think, oh God, now everyone gets an idea of what that was or what I did there or why I went there. Whereas in my book, at least I had still a bit of control over how I frame it or what I give away or what I share about it. But then once there was media out as well, around pretty much from the time as my book came out, it felt quite uncomfortable. And so it means a lot that you it's obviously helped to build some trust or gives me street cred or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it was hard for me to especially also having all my colleagues in mind and the journalistic world that I know so well in mind, and seeing them rolling their eyes. And I know the cynicism that's there in newsrooms and in journalism in general when it comes to anything esoteric or spiritual. It kind of comes to the territory. We're fact-based, we train in facts, not in woo-woo, yeah? So there's already this dismissive stance towards doing anything like that. And I have to say, I think it's part of the problem why we don't see better journalism around it. Because sorry, just a little tangent here, because if the wellness world and the whole spiritual world would have been taken more seriously as a marketplace and as a place where bad shit happens, yeah, then we would have more journalists watching it in the same way as they watch movies and write about it, or watch the stock market and write about it, or write profiles on, entrepreneurs or whatever, yeah. But why don't we get more of that kind of journalism around this whole the yoga world and the spiritual and the self-development world? Because it's not niche anymore. It's mainstream. It's everywhere. So that cynicism around, oh yeah, that's esoteric and therefore it can't be news. I call bullshit on that. So we need to look closer what this is. So I'm a bit of a wanderer between worlds, trying to build that bridge. And I think the only way I can build the bridge and build the trust is by admitting that, yeah, I've been there, I've been part of that.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. And I think the other element with that is perhaps that as a society, we support self-improvement in these different ways, right? Or certainly here in the United States, we have a massive puritanical culture that we are founded from called Christianity. And so people are absolutely freaked out about condemning religions. And so I think they stay away from it instead of going, let's take a look at our world from the perspective of tactics, what's being done, how are people faring? Is this okay for people's health? Do they feel respected in the process? Consent is another big thread that kind of comes up through your writing as well, which I really appreciated. And the complications around that. I mean, even to the point, Anke, I was so happy that you brought something up around this, that, I entered into a conversation recently with somebody about this topic of consent. And what I think we haven't quite advanced into yet in terms of the consent conversation, and maybe certainly in the polyamorous groups, these conversations are happening. But in the general public scope, women, I think, so often don't speak up, don't say something, don't use their voices, because actually they are in a fawn or freeze trauma response. So there is silence. So then how do we hold the men responsible who haven't learned how to read a woman's body or understand that might be happening for them? Even if the male's intentions are really good and they care about the woman, they aren't they can't identify that that's happening. So it's really complicated, and I think this is just sort of the next step of these conversations, raising awareness around all of this.
Absolutely. I think having the cult conversation is the next step, because we're having the consent conversation since the Me Too movement started, right? We're having the trauma conversation that's been going for a few years, and I think the cult conversation is the next thing. It's the next educational step, where therapists also here in New Zealand, where schools need to upskill, need to add that to their curriculum. We have sex education in schools. Where's the cult education in schools, right? Yes. We have consent trainings now also in schools, but it is really the next level of awareness that needs to happen.
Yeah. So will you bring us a little bit into Agama? Fascinating.
Agama, right?
Agama.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what? That was a good Freudian slip, because there is this the hugging saint in India, Amma, and a lot of people consider her a cult. And actually, my husband and I, on the way or after the Osho retreat, actually also stopped over at Amma. So I didn't put her in my book, but technically she's been on my cult trip as well. So yeah.
Well, it's so funny, Anke, because you and I also have, I won't bore our audience with this, but when we pause, I'll have to share more with you, because you and I have so many similarities. And I have received a hug from Amma.
Ooh, okay.
And I also, it's kind of funny, because as we're talking about kind of the whole kids stuff and children in these groups, another group that I got very involved in after I left my cult was I trained in Kundalini yoga. So I did yoga teacher training, and I literally did it with Gurmukh, who's one of the leaders and studied directly with Yogi Bhajan, and is one of the voices who has not come out and, acknowledged the voice of the survivors, which is very interesting. So I always say, I was in and out of about 5 more groups that since news has come out about, so in my journey of getting out of my group. So
you're a workshop junkie and a cult hopper. All right. So Agama Yoga, yeah. I came across them, or what happened was in 2018, B. Schofield, who you might be familiar with, a cult journalist, traveling gonzo cult journalist in the US. Amazing woman. I have a lot of respect for her, but a bit outside of the normal media field, and doing a great service to cult survivors. B was contacted by a group of women from Agama Yoga. So Agama Yoga was one of the biggest yoga training centers in the world, an international school based in Thailand, run by a Romanian guy, Narcis Tarkau, who calls himself Swami Vivekananda. Tantric yoga, esoteric yoga, very strict, lots of purification. And their backdrop, and now it gets a bit messy and murky and dark, and their backdrop to Agama is Misa, which again is a Romanian sex cult that's still mainly under the radar, which is I've got to be careful what I say about them, because they're actually very litigious. But this Romanian guru, Narcis Tarkau, had come from Misa and then started his own branch of pretty much the same stuff, and called it Agama Yoga after having been in India. And it was very patriarchal. There's sexual abuse happened. He's an alleged rapist. And there, again and again, like in so many of these kind of organizations, people trying to change things from within. People had also tried this at Centrepoint, and the palace revolution always failed. People try to, bring the guru to his senses, or get changes implemented. And there's always talk that this would happen, and nothing happened. And he was still jumping staff and students again, and inviting them for private meditations at his house, which was just code for when you're here, we have to have sex, and if you don't do it, then others will think you're weird. So, that was the whole drill. So eventually a group of survivors, or those people who were hoping for the change and nothing happened, they had enough and gave their reports to B. Schofield, and B published them. And it was a massive eruption in the yoga world, in especially on Koh Phangan, now dubbed Tantra Island by Vice, actually, after a documentary this year. And the guru fled, and the whole island was in turmoil. And this wasn't the first abuse scandal in the yoga world, and not in the Tantra world either. More, we know about Bikram, and there are a few other tantric gurus who had already come under scrutiny, and B. Schofield had actually done quite a lot of work around that. But Agama was like wow, that was next level almost. Maybe also because it was seen as a yoga university. They weren't an obscure little, sect. They were big and established. It was yoga. It wasn't. Yeah.
Well, and Anke, isn't that, just recently I've put on one additional new pair of lenses as I'm looking at these groups, and looking through the lens of how big it is, right? And how when you land at one of these places and it is a major production and it's one of the biggest tantric yoga, as you said, universities or college, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, it's hard to really understand how powerful that alone is, right? I mean, it's really quite something. When you show up at a place that is a major business that's been going on, there's a dismissal of one's concerns right there.
And not only is it a big business been going on, but also it links back to an ancient tradition, to yoga, to Tantra. It's not some made-up UFO doomsday card, yeah? It's not flat earthers. It's not some new religion. This is old, traditional, People who went there wanted to become yoga teachers. They didn't want to end up in a sex cult. They wanted to become yoga teachers. But then the Tantra was also introduced, and maybe there was also hope that you could, here's also a community where I meet lots of like-minded people, and they're hot and interested, and oh my God, there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're doing these group exercises. And I mean, they always had these euphemisms for practicing Tantra. I'm making air quotes here now as well. So definitely a very enticing environment, but at the same time, like you said, sort of steeped in this tradition, having a guru. And if you've been in India and you're used to the guru culture, and in yoga, you don't question it. You do as the teacher says, and rigid purification, extreme things people did, and then they mixed that a little bit with these like at Centrepoint, or what I also know from ISTA or so. These long groups, trainings where the human potential movement stuff comes in, and where you sit on the hot seat, and where you work through all your stuff, and then you're in silence, and then you're in the group again. And at the end of all that, I think it's a 6-week training, there's always a group sex ritual. And I've interviewed one woman who pushed herself through this. She says, I was pushed through this. Others say, well, she pushed herself, no one forced her, right? And to actually understand these dynamics, no one's holding a gun to your head or taking your passport away, but there are much more subtle dynamics. And if you watch the documentary, The Vow, we know that a woman is sat in a room for 2 years where the door wasn't locked. Just the sheer power of indoctrination can create these, prison walls and have such a hold on your mind. So came across some of that in Agama as well, where people felt trapped, but they couldn't leave. And also, don't forget, a lot of them were, maybe still are, internationals without a work permit, and there's still Thai Island, where the police is possibly corrupt or possibly paid off by Agama, but where people could get into trouble if they don't have a work visa. So there was always, it wasn't such a clear, clean situation where, I'm just going and call the police or go to the police and report this guru who's done this for me. So it could take a long time to even unpack that it was abuse. Women were often advised there to go and get a yoni massage. So that was, that was prescribed, so to speak, to them by the female Romanian teacher at the school, a yoni, Sanskrit or New Age word these days for your vulva, for your vagina. And so they were given this massage, which can be very amazing and very healing, and can help you with your desire and any kind of blockages or whatever. And then I think in 2 cases, women suddenly felt a penis inside them. They were penetrated. So that's rape, okay? I mean, there's no doubt about this. Penetration, male genitalia without consent is rape. But to unpack this, to actually frame it as such, if you were then in this room, in this, you're flooded with all these emotions. You've just opened up your body. You're maybe having an amazing, maybe orgasmic experience getting this massage, and then the teacher is just helping you to feel more, or thinks that this is what your body wants, and now you could totally open yourself up, and you might even walk out of there going, oh wow, that was not what I expected, but ooh, okay, well, that was amazing. And imagine how long it would take in this environment. You would actually have to leave the island, leave the cult, maybe talk to someone who really understands consent and all of these sexological bodywork dynamics, where you go, actually, no, I was raped. I was raped in that session. And then where do you go? The statute of limitation for rape at the time in Thailand was 3 months. It takes normally years to even untangle yourself from a cult. So long story short, no one went to jail. There were no court cases. The police never really busted anyone. They did do the odd raid here and there. The guru came back exactly after the time limit of 3 months, came back to the island. I was there during that time. So a month after the whole Agama drama broke, I flew to Koh Phangan. I was the only journalist there actually on the ground. The Guardian broke the story. I broke the story for New Zealand and Germany. And there were many, 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 50 news outlets around the world covered this in one way, shape, or form. I was the only one actually there on Koh Phangan. And it's really, sad to say, Agama, I wouldn't say they're recovered, but they're still going. They're still going. Incredible that's actually possible. And I think the location helps. And maybe also, maybe the area of spirituality also helps, that people Google it and then think, oh yeah, but I'm going to get my thing there still, or they're still hooked by the enticing website and the promise of great, orgasmic, whatever. And also the mindset, oh, maybe the media is just lying and it's just exaggerated. It's just angry people spreading negative energy. So you have all this spiritual bypassing as well, which is so rife in the New Age world. And so it's incredible, but Agama is still going. And you know what? In the end of June, I will be just opposite their school at an authors event on the island. I've been invited. There's now a group called Safe Phangan. I will be holding a workshop there. I'll be doing an authors talk there on the island. Yeah, I'll return to the scene of the crime, which would be very, very interesting.
Wow.
And Agama Yoga was basically my journalistic project in the scene that I was quite familiar with, the neo-Tantra scene. And it was also an eye-opener for me coming back from this and thinking, wow, so this has happened on Koh Phangan, and there are other groups here who are moving in and running their courses and buying land here and setting themselves up with their, very touchy-feely, juicy, somehow, sex-focused courses, trainings, and Esther was, is and was one of them. And suddenly I saw them in a different light. I thought, oh, maybe they're not that far removed from Agama, even though, I didn't know of any rape allegations at the time or anything on, of that level, even though I was familiar with, that there had been transgressions and manipulation and more sort of predatory energy coming from some teachers and, especially some male, main teachers and founders. But the parallels became really clear for me after I researched Agama. It's almost like, oh my God, I can't look at this one school and help blow them out of the water and then be in complete denial about what, where I still have a foot in the door, or I still want to get my experience. I was a workshop junkie. I was chasing my highs. I was probably not going there anymore at the end because I really wanted to do the training. I'd been there, done that, and I found all the screaming and the catharsis and whatever. I found it all quite overwhelming and draining. But I was there for the connection and the community and the openness and the rawness and people showing their hearts, and maybe also because I live in New Zealand and I've been originally from somewhere else. Maybe I found a bit deprived in my years here as a middle-class, middle-aged person. I wanted this intensity. I wanted something that maybe brought me back to these. I talked about this, my youth, of my group experiences at my boarding school or in my Christian campfire groups and all of that. I was looking for something that I was still trying to get there, and it also meant I was in denial about the toxic or problematic sides of that group. Yeah, even though it wasn't as apparent and maybe as drastic as Agama, but the parallels were there. So that was a turning point for me as well when I came back from that trip.
Wow. That is so intense. Am I correct in my understanding that actually the leader is there now and the classes are happening, but literally the guy that's been accused, who's leading the entire thing, is back functioning?
Not only is he back, and I mean, he came back 3 months later, so he's been back for years, because that was 2018. The school has done nothing, as far as I can see, on their website or in any way, shape, or form to show some accountability, to apologize for its mistakes, even just as a PR exercise, right? It's business as usual. What they did I think it was in 2019, they sent out a newsletter. It's in my book. It's incredible. The kind of victim blaming in there and denial, how it's all been exaggerated and made up by the media, and angry women who, I think the subtext was who don't get laid enough. That was really the subtext. Like if only, people would be more advanced, then, they wouldn't have to be so angry and they would understand. And so this sheer arrogance, denial, victim blaming, it's just unfathomable. And it's there in plain sight. You go on their website, there is nothing there. It doesn't even say anywhere. There's not even any hint of, and we went through a scandal and this is why. I mean, scandal is putting it mildly, right? People sprayed rape cult outside of Agama at the time, yeah? And that's what they should be known for. And they tried to rebrand themselves for a little while, called themselves Pangan Yoga or something. Didn't really work that well. Now they're back to their old name, and there will always be new people coming in and do more courses. I don't think business is great, to be honest. It hasn't been, because of the pandemic, but then things have ramped up actually during the pandemic because they've done more and more online courses. And now you have a whole influx of new punters there on the island. A lot of people also come from Russia to escape the war in Ukraine and so on. So they're new demographics. The Agama drama would have been forgotten for newcomers, whereas when it happened, there was an activist group. They were handing out flyers on the island to new arrivals. They were wanting to print a T-shirt that says, don't support a rape cult or something like that. Everything was in turmoil, but it's over. It's like a wild country. It happened on Tantra Island, but no one's made a documentary about it, right? And no one's gone to jail. So this is why I think it's quite timely that I'm actually coming back there with my book, talking about it, just highlighting, hey, the perpetrator and the problem is still here. It's quite edgy for me being going to be in such a close proximity to them. At the same time, I know there's great support. There's some really good people, some good community groups who support what I do, and I'm also sick of this sort of cesspool of fake spirituality, guru culture, and sexual abuse. It is literally toxic tantra. Yeah.
And can I ask why are you going there? Is it specifically kind of to work with people there or to address what happened there?
It's my stopover on my annual trip to Europe, and I'm doing some events with my book. So I was invited. I was asked by people there, said, why don't you come and, do your book launch on Copenhagen? I said, actually, why not? So I booked my stopover so I could be there for a while. It's also a lovely environment. It's not the worst place in the world to go to. While I'm also aware, it could be edgy, but I have high hopes that the community there understands that it's a problem that I'm trying to highlight. I'm not just there to necessarily take people down. And I really want to stress this. I have nothing against anyone who is involved with Agama, because I get it. I've met people who were there and who spent, I've interviewed lots of them for my book. I even interviewed someone who was called out as a sexual predator. And I think his story is also really moving because it gives you an insight how he was also groomed and manipulated, but he did the hard yards afterwards. He tried to unpack all this. He tried to redeem himself. And I think this has always been, such a sort of moral sticky point for me, or an important aspect of all of this. For me, it was what have people done afterwards. It's not just who were they inside, what role did they play back then, whether it was Centrepoint or whether it was Agama or Gloriavale. It's also what have they done since they understood, or they've had ample time to understand what this is and what this was. And again, there's a full spectrum there. People still in denial, like the drug chemist we talked about from Centrepoint, or John Potter, the guru's son. And there are people who've done, who've really truly tried to do the work. And I think, again, this is where maybe my German past, or my past is my present, my Germanness comes in, my nationality comes in, that where, I've been so raised in, that this is a process that needs to happen collectively. Yeah, my whole country, my grandfather's, my grandparents' generation had to go through this, had to come to terms with it. People have done really, really bad things, and can we hold them accountable? Yes and no. Yeah, I could have been one of them. Maybe who knows? I could have been a bystander or so. I don't know what role I would have played in a closed totalitarian system. We all want to think of ourselves as the heroes and the whistleblowers, but as history tells us, if that was the case, then we would see a lot more heroes and whistleblowers and not so many bystanders. And again, there are reasons why people just get on with it and keep their head down and just do things to survive. At Centrepoint, for instance, you had teenagers, they became the guru's mistress, air quotes here, yeah? It was a matter of survival, yeah. But it modeled to others. Oh, see, there were girls who wanted this, and the same at Agama. And this, luckily, at least there weren't children involved there, because most, people maybe they didn't usually have children. They were international travelers and yoga students and so on in their 20s and 30s. But again, you had the same group dynamics where some people sort of got with the program and filled the role that they thought they should have in the system just so they can finish their courses and get their credits, and all that money wasn't wasted. And maybe then they turn the blind eye. Can you blame them? Can you not? That for me is still, this is the nuance that I'd like to get into the whole cult conversation.
Yeah. Yes, it's so important. And like you said, I think the gentleman that you mentioned, who is a part of this group, who then really goes through his own process of accountability and taking responsibility for what he did, that actually was a really important point in the book for me of just, and actually I'm glad that you associated it also with your German roots, because the moment in the book where you make that connection for us, that beautiful German word,
Vergangenheitsbewältigung, yeah.
Well, this was something that I was going to share with you after, but it feels like it applies. When I was in, I think it was between my junior and senior year of just high school, and I have family, my roots are German and English. And so I had gone to Stuttgart to see some family. And it was the very first time that I had, I felt like sort of a little adult, that I was having my own experience of travel, having to get myself around. And the family was so welcoming, and they took me around for an entire day, kind of showing me everything. And of course, so much of that experience was a review of the history and what had happened. And I remember at the time, this was also new to me, right? These were my years of kind of awakening to world history and what's happened and where did we come from. And I remember feeling very nervous because in kind of the good girl perspective that I was coming from, it felt like a taboo question to actually ask kind of, how have you reconciled this history? And I cannot tell you, Anke, how moving. I mean, this is a moment that I'll never forget, from way back when, where the way that they spoke about this and the responsibility and the absolute, kind of devastation and responsibility that wasn't even necessarily something they personally had perpetrated, but just culturally kind of even taking on that responsibility. I remember at that time being shocked. And the shock was this newness for me of people being honest around areas of shame. And that kind of this idea that in speaking about it, that in being together around it, that this collective kind of reparation is possible. And I feel like this is such a difficult thing for these groups. I mean, you're never going to get around the cult leader, right? Because usually they're, full-blown narcissists that, frankly, you give them a mic and they dig their own grave because they're so high on themselves or what they do. But if we're not talking about the cult leader, even if the group can come together, but it is so hard. It is not an easy task. And we've seen this with the Kundalini community where they had an internal report done. That's where the abuses around the kids came out. And really, it's a divided community now, that I think people really did have the intention to kind of come together and to go, and there certainly are huge fractions around this sentiment of people who have come together to say, let's explore this, let's discuss this together. How do we reconcile that I never met the abuser, but I'm part of that lineage, but my whole world and business is my yoga teacher training? I mean, it's so complicated. And I think, there aren't right answers, but I think in supporting one another and working on it together, that there really is healing and thoughtful considerations that not only create prevention for those who are engaged in that process, but I think if we get to see that as a society, we learn so much too. So I think about myself again, full circle back to my, early 19-year-old self, having this experience of seeing a group come together in this way that had such an impact on me. I felt safe. I felt like kind of this feeling of like love will prevail, that's possible, that we are human. And just as in one-to-one relationships, we make mistakes and we can apologize. And then we unite in even deeper ways. And hopefully that can happen in these
it's really validating and moving hearing that you experienced a German family like this. I mean, could have been a different kind of family, and maybe you wouldn't have had that impression. But it is part of my generation for sure. This understanding, and not just in Germany. I mean, think of South Africa, truth and reconciliation. Yeah. Which implies truth. I think the truth comes first. You needed the truth first before you can go to the reconciliation. And I'm here for the truth and for giving people a voice. And the journalism is the truth, right? Let's bring it out to the open. And the no justice, no peace, as we know from Black Lives Matter. With that, then you can only get the peace between the generations, or between the victims and perpetrators, and transformative justice and so on, if you also do them justice. Now that can come in many shapes and forms. The justice doesn't always have to involve the legal system, but justice of some kind, the kind of justice that feels right for the victims. I also like what you said earlier about the cult leaders, and we just give them a mic. I've never really been that interested in the leaders themselves. I mean, the backstory to Bert Potter is interesting or not. He's probably quite just a normal dude who then, got on found what worked for him. Or Narcissus Tarko's backstory is interesting because he was linked to the Misa cult. But I'm always way more interested in the people I can identify with, the people in the group, the followers, so to speak, or the critical followers, or the whistleblowers, or the ones who were there for a while and then they ran a mile, but they've also experienced something and they were also part of it. So this whole conglomeration of, that actually make a cult. It's not just the cult leader makes a cult. It's a cult leader without a group is not a cult leader, right? It's just a narcissist with a microphone.
Right.
So it's the group dynamics. And I remember my dad was he studied sociology, and there was always a book above his desk by a famous author academic with the same last name as mine, Richter, and it's called Die Gruppe, which means the group. And I've actually never read it. I probably should, but it's always looking at me from my dad's desk. And my dad later was active in a Christian Jewish reconciliation group as well. So when I was a teenager and just picked up the first books from my parents' bookshelves about the Holocaust, and it's probably in some ways, I don't want to say traumatized, but it had a massive, massive effect on me. I mean, before I'd even kissed a boy, as a 12, 13-year-old, I learned about the worst horrors in human history. And it went deep, and making this link between, but these are my people, these are my grandparents, this is my country, this happened in this nation, and reconciling that somehow with the world that I was living in. It had a profound effect on me. And so I guess this whole theme of how to come to terms with a past, even that wasn't even my personal past, but the collective past, and the shame and the guilt, and how to redeem yourself and how to do the work afterwards, has always been a theme of not just my life, but also a model to me by my father and mother.
Yeah.